Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter entitled The Cleansing of the Gundicha Temple, text number 61. I'm going to read the whole verse, and if you could please repeat after. E Mahabhagavata Yahara Darshane Brajendra Nandana Smriti Haya Sarva Jhane. E Mahabhagavata Yanhara Darshane Rajendra Nandana Smriti Haya Sarva Jhane. E Mahabhagavata Yanhara Darshane Rajendra Nandana Smriti Haya Sarva Jhane. Translation. Here is a great devotee. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, upon seeing him, everyone can remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, son of Maharaj Nanda. Please repeat. Here is a great devotee. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, upon seeing him, everyone can remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, son of Maharaj Nanda. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. In his Anubhasya, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur states that a materialist mistakenly accepts the body and mind as the source of material enjoyment. In other words, a materialist accepts the bodily conception of life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not regard the son of Maharaj Prataparudra with the idea that he was a materialist, being the son of a materialist, nor did he consider himself the enjoyer. Mayavadi philosophers make a great mistake by assuming that the Satchit Ananda Vigraha, the transcendental form of the Lord, is like a material body. However, there is no material contamination in transcendence, nor is there any possibility of imagining a spirituality in matter. One cannot accept matter as spirit, as indicated by the technical words, Boma Ijadi. Interesting, Prabhupada said technical words. They're fact. Bhagavatam 10:84-13. Materialistic Mayavadis imagine the form of God in matter. Although according to their imagination, God is unlimitedly formless. God is unlimitedly formless. Excuse me. This is simply mental speculation. Even though Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he placed himself in the position of a gopi. He also accepted the king's son directly as the son of Maharaj Nanda, Brajendanandana Hari. This is perfect vision according to the direction of the Vedic culture, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam, in Bhagavad Gita, Pandita Samadarshana. Such acceptance of the absolute truth according to Vaishnava philosophy is explained in both the Mundaka Upanishad and Kata Upanishad in the following words. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo namedena bahuna shrutena yam evaisha virinute tena labhyas tasyaisha atma virinute tanum swam. The Supreme Lord is not obtained by expert explanations, by vast intelligence, nor even by much hearing. He is obtained only by one whom he himself chooses. To such a person he manifests his own form. The living entity is entangled in material existence due to his lack of such spiritual vision. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has sung in his Kalyana Kalpataru, Sangsara Ashiya Pakriti Bhajiya Purusha Abhimane Mari. When the living entity comes to the material world, he thinks himself the enjoyer. Thus, he becomes more and more entangled. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sigurave Namah Ugamurodiva Chalam Pangam Langayati Vidam Mande Sigurum Dina Taranam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishvaram. So reading the summary, chapter 12, the cleansing of the Gundicha temple. In his Amrita Pravaha Bhasya, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur summarizes this chapter as follows. The king of Orissa, Maharaj Prataparudra, tried his best to see Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Nityananda Prabhu and the other devotees informed the Lord about the king's desire, but Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would not agree to see him. At that time, Sri Nityananda Prabhu devised a plan, and he sent a piece of the Lord's outward garment to the king. The next day, when Ramananda Rai again entreated Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to see the king, the Lord, denying their request, asked Ramananda Rai to bring the king's son before him. The prince visited the Lord dressed like a Vaishnava, and this awakened remembrance of Krishna. Thus, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu delivered the son of Maharaj Prataparudra. After this, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu washed the Gundicha temple before the Ratha Yatra took place. He then took his bath at Indradumna lake and partook of prasadam in the garden nearby. While Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu washed the temple of Gundicha, a Gaudiya Vaishnava washed the lotus feet of the Lord and drank the water. This incident is very significant, for it awoke within the devotee ecstatic love. Then the son of Advaita Prabhu, named Gopal, fainted during kirtan. And when he did not come to his senses, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu favored him by awakening him. There was also some humorous talk between Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu during prasadam. Advaita Prabhu said that Nityananda Prabhu was unknown to anyone, and that it is not the duty of a householder brahmana to accept dinner with a person unknown in society. In answer to this humorous statement, Sri Nityananda Prabhu replied that Advaita Acharya was a monist, and that one could not know how his mind could be turned by eating with such an impersonalist. The conversation of these two Prabhus, Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu, carried a deep meaning that only an intelligent man can understand. After all the Vaishnavas finished their luncheon, Swarup Damodar and others took their prasadam within the room. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took great pleasure when he saw the Jagannath deity after the period of the deity's retirement. At that time, Lord Chaitanya was accompanied by all the devotees, and all of them were very pleased. So we'll just read the text and move on to Srila Prabhupada's purports, which he has here and then. We'll make some small, short comment. Translation: Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu washed and cleansed the Gundicha temple with his devotees and associates. In this way, he made it as cool and bright as his own heart, and thus he made the temple a befitting place for Lord Sri Krishna to sit. All glories to Gaurachandra, all glories to Nityananda, all glories to Advaita Chandra, and all glories to the devotees of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All glories to the devotees of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, headed by Srivas Thakur. I beg their power so that I can properly describe Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returned from his South Indian tour, Maharaj Prataparudra, the king of Orissa, became very anxious to meet him. The king sent a letter from his capital, Kataka, to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, entreating him to obtain the Lord's permission so that he could go and see him. Replying to the king's letter, the Bhattacharya wrote that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had not given his permission. After this, the king wrote him another letter. In this letter, the king requested Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, please appeal to all the devotees associated with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and submit this petition to them on my behalf. If all the devotees associated with the Lord are favorably disposed toward me, they can submit my petition at the lotus feet of the Lord. By the mercy of all the devotees, one can obtain the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Without his mercy, my kingdom does not appeal to me. If Gaur Hari, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, will not show mercy to me, I shall give up my kingdom, become a mendicant, and beg from door to door. When the Bhattacharya received this letter, he became very anxious. He then took the letter and went to the devotees of the Lord. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya met with all the devotees and described the king's wishes. Then he presented the letter to all of them for inspection. Upon seeing the letter, everyone was astonished to see that King Prataparudra had so much devotion for the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The devotees gave their opinion and said, the Lord will never meet the king, and if we requested him to do so, the Lord would surely feel very unhappy. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya then said, we shall go once again to the Lord, but we shall not request him to meet the king. Rather, we shall simply describe the good behavior of the king. Having thus reached a decision, they all went to the place of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There, although ready to speak, they could not even utter a word. After they arrived at Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's place, the Lord, seeing them, said, what have you all come here to say? I see that you want to say something, but you do not speak. What is the reason? Nityananda Prabhu then said, we want to tell you something. Although we cannot stay without speaking, we are still very much afraid to speak. We want to submit before you something that may or may not be befitting. The matter is this. Unless he sees you, the king of Orissa will become a mendicant. Nityananda Prabhu continued, the king has decided to become a mendicant and accept the sign of a mendicant by wearing an ivory earring. He does not want to enjoy the kingdom without seeing the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In India, there is still a class of professional mendicants who are very much like the gypsies of Western countries. They know some magical art and mystical processes, and their business is to beg from door to door, sometimes pleading and sometimes threatening. Such mendicants are sometimes called yogis and sometimes kanapata yogis. The word kanapata refers to one who has put a hole in his ear to wear an earring made of ivory. Maharaj Prataparudra was so depressed by not getting to see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he decided to become such a yogi. Ordinary men think that a yogi must have an ivory earring in his ear, but this is not the sign of a real yogi. Maharaj Prataparudra also thought that to become a mendicant yogi, one must wear such an earring. If you go to Vrindavan to this day, sometimes they have, I remember a few times you're down in Loy Bazaar, for instance, and you're in one of the shops, and then out of the blue you'll hear some shaking of, I think is it a din-din? Or it's a rattle that has, that you shake like this, and sometimes you see it in festivals. But they have these persons, I don't know how else to describe them, that are dressed with chadars. They don't have any tilak. They have the Shiva markings across their forehead. And they'll have rings in their ears, big rings. And they'll go from shop to shop ringing this or shaking this rattle. And I was watching this couple, these 2 or 3 guys, they were walking along, and they were going from shop to shop. And every shop they went to, they would stand there and they would rattle this thing. And the shop owners would immediately start paying attention. And they'd go into the back room, they'd come out with a little donation, give it to the guys, and they wouldn't leave until they were given something. And sometimes if the shop owner was busy with someone and was doing some sale, they would start rattling louder and louder and louder, threatening. As a matter of fact, Prabhupada makes this point here in the purport. And it's quite astounding. And I asked one shop owner, I was in Ganga Prasad's place, and I asked him, who are these fellas? And he said, they belong to some sect. They go along and they're collecting donations. And if you don't give them, they'll threaten you. They actually get physical. So just to get rid of them, as soon as they hear the sound coming down, immediately they know to get some rupees, whatever, and have it ready for these fellows. And they would do this on a daily basis. And so Prabhupada points this out, these professional mendicants who are very much like gypsies of the Western countries. Interesting. Translation. Nityananda Prabhu continued, the king also expressed his desire to see the moon-like face of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. To his eyes, full satisfaction. He would like to raise the lotus feet of the Lord to his heart. Hearing all these statements, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mind was certainly softened. But externally he wished to speak some harsh words. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I can understand that you all desire to take me to Kataka to see the king. Purport. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is naturally the reservoir of all kindness. And as soon as he heard the statement made by the king, his heart immediately softened. Thus the Lord was ready to go to see the king, even at Kataka. He did not even consider allowing the king to come from Kataka to Jagannath Puri to see him. It is significant that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so kind that he was ready to go to see the king at Kataka. Apparently, it was never expected that the king wanted to see the Lord at his place, but by way of being externally harsh, the Lord indicated that if all the devotees so desired, he would go to Kataka to see the Lord. To see the king. So, here Srila Prabhupada again, he's making a very wonderful point, is that the devotees are by nature very kind. And they're very willing to share Krishna consciousness and give their association. But they're not foolish, as indicated in the following verse. They're not foolish. And we heard the other day in a class the verse Atsanga Tyag E Vaishnava Chara. The Vaishnavas are careful. Although we give our association freely, people don't have to pay us when we go out and spread Krishna consciousness. But at the same time, we're not foolish. We don't play with fire. There used to be an act in Las Vegas. It reminds me, there was an act in Las Vegas of these two guys, two brothers, I don't know what they were, maybe related, but they had this tiger show. and they would have a number of tigers in their cage, and they would have them do all kinds of tricks, and people would ooh and ah. They had white tigers, and they would do sometimes really dangerous things. One such time, one of the fellows who was one of the trainers, he went up to a tiger and put his head in the tiger's mouth, and the tiger bit down on him and didn't kill him, but he was paralyzed. So the devotees are naturally kind, but we're not foolish. We don't play with fire. When there's some danger, we try to avoid ordinary people because ordinary people are materially attached. So we're careful not to make that kind of step, that kind of bold step, you could say, or foolish step. And this is indicated in the next verse. It's very nice how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu responds to the devotees. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continued, "What to speak of spiritual advancement? All the people will blaspheme me. And what to speak of all the people? Damodar would chastise me. I shall not meet the king at the request of all the devotees, but I shall do so if Damodar will give his permission." Purport. From the spiritual point of view, a sannyasi is strictly forbidden to see materialistic people, especially a king who is always engaged in counting pounds, shillings, and pence. Indeed, the meeting between a sannyasi and a king is always considered abominable. A sannyasi is always subjected to public criticism, and a small fault on his character is taken seriously by the public. People actually expect a sannyasi to preach and not take part in any social or political matters. If a sannyasi is subject to public criticism, his preaching will not be fruitful. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu specifically wanted to avoid such criticism so that his preaching work would not be hampered. It so happened that while the Lord was talking to his disciples, at that time the devotee Damodar Pandit was present. This Damodar Pandit was a very faithful devotee and a staunch lover of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Whenever there was anything that might touch or taint the character of the Lord, Damodar Pandit would immediately point it out, not even considering the exalted position of the Lord. It is sometimes said that fools rush in where angels dare not. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to point out Damodar Pandit's foolishness in coming forward to criticize the Lord. This is why the Lord stated that if Damodar Pandit would give him permission, he would go to see the king. There was deep meaning in this statement, for it is a warning that Damodar should not dare criticize the Lord anymore, for it is not befitting his position as a devotee. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was considered the guide and spiritual master of all the devotees living with him. Damodar Pandit was one of them, and the Lord rendered Damodar Pandit a special favor by warning him to avoid criticizing him any further. A devotee or a disciple should never attempt to criticize the Lord or his representative, the spiritual master. So again, a devotee should be very careful. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu again here is showing us the example and the wonderful verse, Vairagya Vijanija Bhakti Yoga Shikshartam Eka Purushak Purana, points out how the Lord came and he's teaching us by his example real knowledge and his devotional service and detachment from that which does not foster Krishna consciousness. So we're prepared, the devotees certainly, especially the preachers, the members of the Krishna conscious movement are all preachers. We're prepared to go out and give Krishna consciousness, but at the same time we're very, very careful to not rush in, as Prabhupada points out, this wonderful English British saying. What is it? Fools rush not. Fools rush in where angels dare not. Damodar, translation. Damodar immediately replied, "My Lord, you are the fully independent Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since everything is known to you, you know what is permissible and what is not permissible. I am merely an insignificant jiva, so what power do I have to give directions to you? By your own personal choice, you will meet with the king. I shall see it. The king is very much attached to you, and you are feeling affection and love toward him. Thus, I can understand that by virtue of the king's affection for you, you will touch him. Although you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead and are completely independent, still you are dependent on the love and affection of your devotees. That is your nature." Nityananda Prabhu then said, "Who is there in the three worlds who can ask you to see the king? Still, isn't it the nature of an attached man to give up his life if he does not attain his desired object? For instance, some of the wives of the Brahmanas who were performing sacrifices gave up their lives in the presence of their husbands for the sake of Krishna." Purport. This refers to the day Lord Sri Krishna and his cowherd boys and flocks of animals were present in the pasturing grounds near Mathura. At that time, the cowherd boys, being a little hungry, requested food, and Lord Krishna asked them to go to the Brahmanas who were engaged nearby in performing yajna or sacrifice, and to get some food from that yajna. Being so ordered by the Lord, all the cowherd boys went to the Brahmanas and asked them for food, but they were denied. After this, the cowherd boys begged food from the wives of the Brahmanas. All these wives were very much devoted to Lord Krishna in spontaneous love. And as soon as they heard the request of the cowherd boys and understood that Krishna wanted some food, they immediately left the place of sacrifice. They were very much chastised for this by their husbands, and they were ready to give up their lives. It is the nature of a pure devotee to sacrifice his life for the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And Lord Brahma also makes that comment, right? Jnana priyasmu rapasya namanta eva. That the devotees of the Lord, stane stita shrutigatam tanavan manobhir, that whatever their position is, whatever their condition is, they're ready to dedicate their lives, their body, mind, and words in the service of the Lord, even risking a dangerous condition, right? Narayana parak sarve nakotas shana bidbyati. The devotees of the Lord, they're prepared to take all risks in order to spread Krishna consciousness. And we're seeing that practically in this day and age. The devotees in many places around the world are going out into the streets where at any moment you can be shot, robbed, a bomb can fall on you in some places. And they're prepared to preach Krishna consciousness despite all of that. The gopis, of course, are the topmost example of that. And because of that sacrifice, ye prayaso jita jito, right? The unconquerable becomes conquered by that kind of surrender. Prabhupada makes this point so nicely. Translation. Nityananda Prabhu then submitted one suggestion for the Lord's consideration. There is a way, he suggested, by which you need not meet the king, but by which would enable the king to continue living. If you, out of your mercy, send one of your outer garments to the king would live hoping to see you sometime in the future. Purport. Sri Nityananda Prabhu was thus very tactfully suggesting that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu give a piece of his old clothing to the king. Even though the king was not to meet the Lord, the king would then be pacified by receiving such a cloth. The king was very anxious to see the Lord, yet it was not possible for the Lord to see him. Just to resolve the situation, Nityananda Prabhu suggested that the Lord send an old piece of clothing. Thus the king would understand that the Lord was showing mercy to him. The king would then not do anything drastic, like giving up his life or becoming a mendicant. And Srila Prabhupada, again, was a good example of this. Just as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there are so many devotees who have articles given to them by Srila Prabhupada. Isn't it? Srila Prabhupada would make it a regular practice of going this place, that place. And, if you liked my watch, I'll give you my watch. Or if you like my bead bag or whatever. There'd be so many things. And those things become worshipable, right? Tadyanam samacharam. Some years ago, when we were in St. Louis, doing the airport book distribution there, there were a couple of us. It's a little amusing, but we had, it was Sir Das, Vaishesika Prabhu, and myself. We had a little altar set up in our room, our Sankirtan room, actually where we lived, but we had a little curtain in front of it. So we set up a little altar, and every morning we would do a little puja together, and we would recite some shlokas and chant some Hare Krishna, of course. But the altars were, the first altar was Paramahamsa Gangsha, because I happened to have a piece of Srila Prabhupada's Gamsha. So we set it up in a little picture frame, and it was called Paramahamsa Gamsha. And next to it was Sir Das's. He had Malajola Murti. He had Srila Prabhupada's bead bag. So he set up a little altar with bead bag. And then Vaishesika Prabhu had Tadiya Dodi. And so we would have these little, it was a Dodi that belonged to Srila Prabhupada. So like this, we would do a little puja every morning. And this is, again here, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is prepared to give his cloth because it's the same thing. It's associating with the devotee, with the Supreme Lord or with his devotee. Tadyanam samacharam. It's considered, the value is the same. Translation. The Lord said, "Since you are all very learned personalities, whatever you decide, I shall accept." Lord Nityananda Prabhu then obtained an external garment used by the Lord by requesting it from Govinda. Thus Nityananda Prabhu delivered the old cloth from the care of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya sent it to the king. When the king received the old cloth, he began to worship it exactly as he would worship the Lord personally. Purport. This is also the conclusion of the Vedic injunctions. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the absolute truth, everything in relation to him is on the same platform. The king had great affection for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and although he did not see the Lord, he had nonetheless already attained the conclusion of devotional service. Immediately upon receiving the cloth from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the king began to worship it, accepting it as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The Lord's clothing, bedding, slippers, and everything required as an ordinary necessity are all transformations of Sesha, Vishnu, the expansion of Sri Baladev. Thus the cloth and other paraphernalia of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are but other forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everything connected to the Lord is worshipable. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructs us that just as Krishna is worshipable, Krishna's place, Vrindavan, is also worshipable. And as Vrindavan is worshipable, similarly, the paraphernalia in Vrindavan, the trees, roads, river, everything is worshipable. A pure devotee thus sings, Jaya Jai Vrindavan Basi Yatajan. All glories to the residents of Vrindavan. If a devotee has a staunch devotional attitude, all these conclusions will be awakened or revealed within the heart. Yasya deva parabhakti yatateva tatagaro tasyaite katitahi artha prakashanti mahatmana. Only unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of the Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. Thus, following in the footsteps of Maharaj Prataparudra and other devotees, we should learn to worship everything belonging to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is referred to by Lord Shiva as Tadiyanam. In the Padma Purana it is said, Aradhananam sarvesham Vishnu aradhanam param, tasmat paradanam devi tadiyanam samacharam. O Devi, the most exalted system of worship is the worship of Lord Vishnu. Greater than that is the worship of Tadiya, or anything belonging to Vishnu. Shri Vishnu is Satchidananda Vigraha. Similarly, the most confidential servant of Krishna, the spiritual master, and all devotees of Vishnu are Tadiya. The Satchid Ananda Vigraha Guru, Vaishnavas, and things used by them must be considered Tadiya, and without a doubt worshipable by all living beings. After returning from his service in South India, Ramananda Rai requested the king to allow him to remain with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Ramananda Rai requested the king to allow him to stay with the Lord, the king immediately gave him permission with great satisfaction. As for the king himself, he began to solicit Ramananda Rai to make a meeting arrangement. The king told Ramananda Rai, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very, very merciful to you. Therefore, please solicit my meeting with him without fail. The king and Ramananda Rai returned together to Jagannath Kshetra, and Sri Ramananda Rai met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. At that time, Ramananda Rai informed Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about the ecstatic love of the king. Indeed, as soon as there was some opportunity, he repeatedly informed the Lord about the king. Sri Ramananda Rai was indeed a diplomatic minister for the king. His general behavior was very expert, and simply by describing the king's love for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gradually softened the Lord's mind. Purport: a diplomat in the material world knows how to deal with people, especially in political affairs. Some of the great devotees of the Lord, like Ramananda Rai, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Sanatana Goswami, and Rupa Goswami, were government officers and had a background of very opulent householder life. Consequently, they knew how to deal with people. In many instances, we have seen the diplomacy of Rupa Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Ramananda Rai employed in the service of the Lord. When Raghunath Das Goswami's father and uncle were to be arrested by government officials, Raghunath Das Goswami hid them, and personally met the government officers and settled the affair diplomatically. We know that. It's a fabulous story, how he paid them off. This is but one instance. Similarly, Sanatana Goswami, after resigning his ministership, was thrown into jail, and he bribed the attendant of the jail so that he could leave the clutches of the Nawab and live with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now we see Ramananda Rai, a most confidential devotee of the Lord, diplomatically soften the heart of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, despite the fact that the Lord definitely decided not to meet the king. The diplomacy of Ramananda Rai and entreaties of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and all the other great devotees succeeded. The conclusion is that diplomacy used for the service of the Lord is a form of devotional service. And anyone who goes out on book distribution can attest to that. Translation: Maharaj Prataparudra, in great anxiety, could not endure not seeing the Lord. Therefore, Sri Ramananda Rai, by his diplomacy, arranged a meeting with the Lord for the king. Sri Ramananda Rai frankly requested Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, please show your lotus feet to the king at least once. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, my dear Ramananda, you should make this request after duly considering whether it is befitting for a sannyasi to meet a king. If a mendicant meets a king, this world and the next world are both destroyed for the mendicant. Indeed, what is there to say of the next world? In this world, People will joke if a sannyasi meets a king. Ramananda Roy replied, "My Lord, you are the supreme and independent personality. You have nothing to fear from anyone because you are not dependent on anyone." When Ramananda Roy addressed Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu objected, saying, "I am not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but an ordinary human being. Therefore, I must fear public opinion in 3 ways, with my body, mind, and words." As soon as the general public finds a little fault in the behavior of a sannyasi, they advertise it like wildfire. A black spot of ink cannot be hidden on a white cloth. It is always very prominent. Ramananda Roy replied, "My dear king, you have delivered so many sinful people. My dear Lord, you have delivered so many sinful people. This king Prataparudra, the king of Orissa, is actually a servitor of the Lord and your devotee." Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then said, there may be much milk in a big pot, but if it is contaminated by a drop of liquor, it is untouchable. The king certainly possesses all good qualities, but simply by taking up the name king, he has infected everything. But if you are still very eager for the king to meet with me, please first bring his son to meet me. It is indicated in the real scriptures that the son represents the father. Therefore, the son's meeting with me would be just as good as the king's meeting with me. Purport. In Srimad Bhagavatam it is said, "Atmavai putra utpanam iti vedana sunam." The Vedas enjoin that one is born as his own son. The son is non-different from the father, and this is admitted in every revealed scripture. In Christian theology, it is believed that Christ, the Son of God, is also God, or in other words, that they are identical. Ramananda Roy then went to inform the king about his talks with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and following the Lord's orders, brought the king's son to him. The prince just entering upon his youth, was very beautiful. He was blackish in complexion and had large lotus eyes. The prince was dressed in yellow cloth, and there were jeweled ornaments decorating his body. Therefore, anyone who saw him would remember Lord Krishna. Seeing this boy, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately remembered Krishna. Meeting the boy in ecstatic love, the Lord began to speak, and which we started off with. "Here is a great devotee," Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said. "Upon seeing him, everyone must remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, son of Maharaj Nanda." In the purport here, there's a wonderful, wonderful verse that Prabhupada quotes, "Nayam Atma Pravachanena Labhyo." And this whole pastime is that if the Lord desires, he can do, and of course he's totally independent, and he can reveal himself as he chooses, to whomever he chooses. And there's a beautiful pastime that's really illustrates and connected to this whole experience that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is having. And it involves a devotee of the Lord. His name was Bandhu Mahanti, who was a non-Brahmin. But he was a great devotee of Lord Jagannath. But as he was very poor, although he was very poor, he believed that Lord Jagannath was his true friend and would come to help him in his time of need. But Bandhu Mahanti, he used to spend most of his day, practically all day, just reading about Lord Jagannath and forgetting his wife and children. And his wife, of course, did not like this. She didn't even know that he was a devotee of Lord Jagannath. But she thought that he had some friend, local friend, and his name happens to be Jagannath. But she was annoyed that Bandhu, he wanted to spend more time with his friend than with me. So she asked, "Who is this friend?" And Bandhu said, "Well, you don't know him. You cannot know him. He's very rich. He has a great building. He's a king. And he has fine dress. His behavior, his lifestyle, everything about him is royal. And he is also very kind. And then his wife said, okay, well, let's go see him. I want to see this person. But Bandhu said, no, how can we go see him? We have poor dress. If you go see him, we have to give gifts. And you would have to wear gold bangles, a necklace. And we don't have such things. So we can't go see him. But his wife responded by saying that if your friend is true and faithful, he will respect you and accept you as you are. And understanding our need, he'll be receptive. But Bandhu, he didn't want to listen to his wife. He didn't take it very seriously. He didn't pay attention to her. And of course, she became even more angry. The village that they lived in was going through very hard times. They were farmers, and the harvest was not very good. So things were not looking very good for the community. And they would, so many people were complaining that how are we going to survive? But Bandhu, his response would be that my friend, this friend of mine, Jagannath, he's very rich. And if he wishes, we can be saved. And trying to somehow or other appease the villagers. So his wife said, okay, we're going to go see him. So she forced Bandhu to take her to this place where your friend lives, which happened to be some 30 miles. So they left in the evening, and they left their village and went off to Puri, where this friend of Bandhu's was living. And it took them 3 days because they were walking some 30 miles. It took them 3 days, and they got there in the evening very late. And because it was late, when they went to the temple, it was closed. So what to do? So Bandhu took his family, and they went to the south gate, where at the south gate, the water that is used to rinse the rice of the offering, Lord's offering, flows out in a trough. And the cows come and drink that water. And we know that is associated also with Raghunath Das Goswami, the same place. So they decided, well, let's just stay here, and we'll at least get some rest. So they all fell asleep. The wife, the children were crying, they were upset, they were hungry. So she took some of the water that was used to rinse that rice, and she gave it to the children, and they became a little pacified, and they fell asleep. So everyone went to sleep. But because she was in so much anxiety about the children, she woke up in the middle of the night. And as she woke up, she saw coming towards them, and she heard this very dark, very sophisticated, aristocratic-looking person with a large gold tray on his head, and he was calling, "Where is Bandhu? Where is Bandhu?" And she didn't know what to do, how to respond, and said that we're here. She didn't want, because it looked like he may go away, and he had this tray full of all sorts of wonderful edibles. So she told this young dark brahmana carrying these different types of food that we're right here. What is the matter? So the young brahmana, he smiled mysteriously and said, the friend of Bandhu Mohanty has sent him some food. Please take it. quickly, as I have a lot of other work to do. And the wife was not in any position. She didn't know what to do. Bandhu was still resting. She didn't want to wake him up because they'd been on such a long journey. So she accepted all the food, and she placed it down with the children. They all ate, and they all went to sleep. Bandhu, in the middle of the night, woke up, and he began asking, "What is this?" And his wife explained to him what had just recently happened, and he began to cry profusely. "Why didn't you wake me up? You are blessed to see him, and I am unfit to ever meet him." The wife didn't understand these situations. She couldn't grasp actually the deep meaning of this whole experience. But Bandhu, although he was crying, he took whatever was left from on the golden tray. He very enthusiastically ate it, and he washed the tray very nicely and was wondering what should I do with this. So he decided to put it under his pillow, and he'll try to deal with it the next day. So in the morning, there was a big commotion in the village that someone has stolen the golden tray of Jagannath Swami. And the guards, the police went walking around the temple, and they saw Bandhu there. He's sleeping, and he's got this tray underneath his pillow. He must have stolen it. So they arrested him and brought him to the king. And the king decided he needs to be punished for this theft. But I won't deal with it until the next day. So he went to sleep, and as he was resting that night, Jagannath Swami appeared to him in a dream and told him that, "O king, if a friend comes to your house, is it not that you greet him with a fine meal? Bandhu Mohanty is my friend. So what fault have I done to give him food on my golden tray? Will you sentence me also? Please release him at once." So the king, of course, was astonished. He let Bandhu Mohanty free, and he made a proclamation, and he ordered that Bandhu Mohanty and all his descendants be allowed to serve in the temple itself. And even to this day, there's descendants of Bandhu, and to this day they make the first offering that's offered to Jagannath Swami. And that offering is carried on a beautiful golden tray. And even to this day, there are persons with that same surname, Mohanty, that are serving the deity. And the whole point of this story is that it's astonishing that Bandhu Mohanty was a non-Brahmana and held no sort of hereditary service in the temple before, but because Jagannath desired, because Jagannath appeared, and of course this is not just a simple or a insignificant experience, because the Mohanty family are the only descendants amongst all these servers of Jagannath, and there's thousands of them that have this position. And it was simply because he considered Lord Jagannath his friend. So this is the mercy of the Lord. When the Lord wants, He can give us more mercy than we can want. But the point is that, or can understand. But the point is that the Lord is independent, and if He wants, He can give His association to a king, or He can help even the most fallen, unqualified persons. We just have to make Him our friend. We'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.